Hi everyone, welcome to our first substantive session today, AI to Bridge the Justice Gap. I'm Kate Fazio, Head of Innovation and Engagement at Justice Connect, and if you're just joining us, welcome. We're very excited to be running this session today, and it's really fantastic to have so many of you with us online. As this is our first substantive session, we will be running a Q&A and there'll be opportunity for you to ask questions. I'd encourage you to pop those questions into the question panel as we go along, and you'll also have an opportunity to ask any extra questions you might have at the end of the session. I will be getting to those questions once we reach the end of the session. Before we go into the substance of the presentation, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. There are many people here on many lands. For me, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respect to elders past and present. As I mentioned earlier, if you would like to make an acknowledgement, please do so in the chat. We would love to hear that. Our AI natural language processing projects is, in my opinion, one of the most exciting pieces of work that we have in our digital innovation product suite. It really is cutting edge, and it reflects the growth of our program in its sophistication and approach over the last few years. We have our wonderful project partners joining us today. From the University of Melbourne, we have Professor Tim Baldwin, who has been leading work on this project with us, Dr. Mel Mystica and Dr. Jehan Lau. This Melbourne Uni team are just fabulous. I cannot praise them enough for the work that they've done with us. It's been a true partnership, a true collaboration, and the work that you see today reflects, I think, that really excellent collaborative working partnership that we have together. We bring really complementary skill sets to this work. Justice Connect has access to data, understands the user experience, understands use cases, and also understands the law. And the Melbourne University team are absolute experts in natural language processing, not just in delivering a great product, but in thinking about how you can deliver a natural language processing AI product in a resource constrained environment. So it's been such a pleasure working with the team, and I'm looking forward to you being able to hear from them later in our presentation. The other thing I'd like to do before we get into the substance of the presentation is thank our project funders. This has been a very ambitious, very cutting edge project. And when we went to our funders and said, we think that we can build an AI model that can diagnose legal problems in natural language, that was a big statement. We, of course, thought it was true, but our funders were very courageous in backing us in this project. And I hope they feel like their funding has returned on that investment, that we have a working model with a huge potential application across the legal ecosystem. But I do especially want to thank these funders, the Victorian Legal Services Board and the New South Wales Attorney General's Department Access to Justice Innovation Fund. Without that funding, without their trust and support, this work would absolutely not be possible. Just to recap on Justice Connect's purpose, for those of you who weren't in our introductory session, Justice Connect is an Australian charity, and in the face of huge unmet legal need, we design and we deliver high impact interventions to increase access to legal support and to achieve social justice. It's a big ambition, and that is why digital innovation forms a big part of our work at Justice Connect, because that scale of unmet legal need means that we need to be thinking outside of the box about how we're going to move the dial there. Again, just to recap for those who weren't in our introductory session, we take a particular approach to digital innovation at Justice Connect, and this is informed by our organisational values, by our position in the legal ecosystem, our status as a charity. Our technology is human-centred and it's driven by data and evidence. We involve the end users of all our technology in the design process and in the evaluation process for our products. We always take an iterative approach. A product or a project is never finished at Justice Connect. There's always more we can do. We leverage technology where possible and where it makes sense. We are not technology first. We will use technology where we think that it has value to add to solving a problem. And we work with pro bono. We have a huge pro bono network, and that pro bono network provides us support in a whole range of ways. And in the innovation space, there's some really interesting ways that lawyers are getting involved. And this project in particular is a really great model for this. And we'll explain later about how over 300 pro bono lawyers have been helping us to train our AI model. The other thing is we work to make system level interventions, because a system level intervention really does have the potential to deliver impact at scale. And this AI project very much sits in that space. We're trying to build a tool and a system that can work across the whole ecosystem and add value in a whole range of contexts. Very quickly, I want to give some background to the project. Why are we interested in AI? Why did we think this was an idea worth pursuing? In the huge amount of research work that we've done around the help seeker experience of looking for legal assistance in Australia, and also the legal organisational experience of trying to find people with unmet legal need and match them up to the right service, we've identified a few problem areas where AI potentially has a role to play. The key challenge is helping help seekers to identify what is the type of problem they have. And why does that matter? Because the type of problem that you have influences which service you're eligible for, what lawyer has the right expertise to assist you, and in fact, whether or not there is a legal service available to assist you at all. This dilemma comes up at several points in the help seeker journey. First of all, people have life problems, and sometimes those life problems have a legal dimension. There might be a problem around work. There might be a problem around housing. There might be a problem around family. It is not often that a person's problem presents itself perfectly tied up as a legal issue with a label on it that everyone can clearly see. Now that's a legal problem that has a legal solution to it. Nearly always, the legal problems are tied up with life problems, and it can be challenging to identify the legal problem and the legal strategy in that context. In particular, when people are faced with a problem and they are trying to self-help, they're trying to understand more about that problem online, it can be really difficult for them to connect up to the right resources if they don't have the right words to use. They may go to Google, very much like we do when we have a medical problem, and type in some symptoms, type in what's happening. This is happening, what can I do? I've got this problem, question mark. And they'll return a bunch of results on a search engine. And if they have not used the right words, it's very unlikely they will get helpful results. This is a huge barrier to access to justice, because at this point, a lot of people may not even realize they have a legal problem. And if they have a hunch they have a legal problem, they're still going to struggle to work out which legal problem is it, or combination of legal problems. The next place where it's relevant is where someone who has realised that they have a legal problem is then trying to connect up with a service or a resource. Again, without having the right words, the right context, the right language, they're really going to struggle. And they often enter what we call in our sector the referral roundabout. They will call up a legal service, spend some time explaining their problem. That legal service will often go and have a meeting about it and then say to them, unfortunately, your problem is not covered by our service. Here's some other services that you can try. And they will go around telling their story to all these different services. They often end up back at the service at which they started, and no one has yet been able to say they can assist. Now, if that person had the right language, had the right words to describe their problem, they may reach the organisation that can assist them much more quickly. Or if there is no service available to assist, they'll find out that information without going through that excruciating process of being bounced from organisation to organisation. Finally, the point at which it can be relevant is once someone does enter a legal service and that organisation is going to provide assistance, as I mentioned, there can often be a real cluster of legal problems, and AI can actually assist our paralegals, our lawyers, to think about what are the cluster of problems that might be present here. I might be an employment law lawyer and I can clearly see that there's an employment law problem here, but are there perhaps some other things at play that are beyond my area of expertise? And can AI play a role in helping me spot those extra issues? So what we've seen is help seekers talk about their legal problems in their own words. They use the language that is familiar to them, in their context, in their community, for their culture. And that language is rarely using technical legal terms. We've done a significant body of research with help seekers, doing exercises like watching them type their legal problems into Google, doing exercises like getting them to write out the legal problem that they have in their own words, and then have our lawyers try to spot what problems might be there. And it's not straightforward. And as I said, very rarely does an average help seeker present with a really clear articulation of their problem. So the articulations here on this screen are of the more legal bent, and we're going to show you some actual language later in this presentation of real language that help seekers use. For every person that goes through our online intake system, they need to select a legal problem category that applies, and then they need to describe it to us in more detail. The reason why we do both of these is we want to give people the opportunity to try to put their problem into a category, but we also want to hear their longer articulation of it, because we know how often they don't get that categorization right. We also then survey the people that come through our online intake system, and we ask them, how confident were you in making that selection? How did you feel about that? And 45% of respondents to that survey self-identify that they don't think they did a very good job. They identify as being not confident in the selection that they've made. Now, our own research has shown that that is an underestimation, because then when we go through and as lawyers analyse that open text and compare it to the category selections made by help seekers, the incorrect selection ratio is even higher. So some help seekers don't know what they don't know. They don't realise that they're not using the right words or making the right selection. Some of the explanations people have given us around why they aren't confident are really telling. There are too many courts. It's unclear what laws do what. We heard that one so much. We heard around where there are clusters of issues. So there's a family relationship together with financial issues. What's the legal problem category that applies there? And then we heard a lot of this response, it's complex and I'm not an expert. Essentially, please don't ask me to make a technical selection on my own behalf. So what we want to do is create a natural language processing AI model that can run over the story that people tell about their problem and help empower that person to then appropriately categorize their problem. The model is not intended to be determinative, but it is intended to assist people in making the right selection. And we'll show you how that works in practice. So we have gone ahead and run this project, and we're very excited to be at a point in the project where we now have a working model. The hypothesis that this could help has been validated, and we have actually integrated the model into our intake tool in a testing environment. And before I move on, I should say that to run a project like this, there are a few things that you really need, and we're going to talk about these more later, but you need lots of data, you need lots of experts who can handle that data, and you need to have natural language processing and AI experts who understand how to build and train models. So in order for us to deliver on this project, we have combined Justice Connect with our pro bono network and our partners at the University of Melbourne to be able to deliver on this. I'm going to really quickly run through the steps that we undertook in this project, because we're often asked, how do you go about doing AI? So this is a really quick summary of how we went about AI at Justice Connect. The first critical thing is getting the data. You need a lot of data to train an AI model. It needs to be good quality data and it needs to be well annotated. So for us, the main source for our data is the descriptions of legal problems that people make in our intake tool. Now, it's very important that we disclose this to people when they make the application, and we also undertake a range of very labour-intensive measures to ensure that no one's confidentiality is breached, to ensure that we're not disclosing legal problems that would be identifiable if someone else were to read them. I'll explain how we do that in the next slide. But in terms of our data collection, we now have over 10,000 intake descriptions of legal problems that we're able to use for this project. So we need to pass over that data to the University of Melbourne. We don't just give them the data, we also give them the data annotated, and I'll explain what that means. But before we can do anything with this data, we need to make sure that it is safe and ethical for us to be using this data in this way. So for every one of those 10,000 language samples, we went through a project in-house, reviewing every sample and replacing any identifying information with flags. So as you can see here, we replaced Jane Smith with first name, second name. We replaced the address with address. And this becomes important when it comes to training the model, that the model can understand the syntax of the language, so that if there are gaps, the model can understand there's a gap here, but it was a name. And there's a gap here and it was an address. There's a gap here and it was a type of person. The other thing we did in that review process was make sure that we weren't submitting samples that were highly sensitive or things that would, regardless of the de-identification process, still reveal some information. So there might be a really novel case where even if you take out all the names and addresses, you might have seen it in the news, and therefore it's pretty clear who we're talking about by passing over that sample. So we've also made sure that any samples that are remotely like that are not included in our project data set. Once we had that completely de-identified, carefully considered data set ready to go, we needed to annotate it. And by annotating, we mean we need an expert to look at that sample and say which areas of law apply, and then to do that in a few different ways to help train the model. So lawyers were asked to select which areas of law might be in the language and then actually highlight, and you can see on the screen here what's happening, highlight the areas of text that lead them to believe that that area of law is raised by the sample. And then finally, our lawyers not only identify that area of law, they also put a confidence rating. So they explain, based on what I've read, I might be 100% sure that there's a tenancy issue here and 30% sure that there's a family law issue as well. That again helps our model understand that this language absolutely means there's a tenancy problem. This language might indicate that there's a family law problem. Every single data sample that we have was annotated by 5 different lawyers, because we want to make sure reasonable minds can differ within a profession. So we wanted to make sure that we were getting a range of views for each sample. Now, the way we did this is we created a game called Tag, and we recruited 310 lawyers in our pro bono network. They all became users of the game. We also had a range of our own staff in the game. I'm in the game. And these samples get served up to you, and you can quite quickly read the sample, say which areas of law, do the highlight and put your confidence rating, and then you move on to the next sample. And it's a really efficient way to get a professional to really annotate up in a very high quality way the data. It also lets us export all that data from the game in a format that's really useful for the University of Melbourne team. So overall, we have put 9,950 language samples into our game. We've got 310 lawyers in that game, and those 310 lawyers have applied 38,000 annotations, and they have highlighted areas of law to train the model, areas of language, sorry, to train the model on when language is associated with an area of law 99,000 times. So this is an enormous undertaking, and I think this truly shows where pro bono can be engaged in some really novel applications of their expertise. We're not asking these lawyers to run files, we're asking them to use their training to help us teach an AI model. The feedback we've had from the lawyers involved in this project is that they absolutely love it. They feel like they're making a really significant contribution to a project that's going to have social justice outcomes. So on that note, I would like to particularly thank those law firms that have provided the lawyers, allowed them to use their pro bono hours towards this project. Those law firms are listed there on the screen. Again, like I thanked our funders for having the courage to engage in this project, I would say that to these law firms as well. Thank you for backing us. Thank you for providing us with access to so many lawyers to do this work. We've been really overwhelmed by the response, and the project wouldn't be where it is without those contributions. I'm going to get into a very, very quick summary of the technical layers of an AI model. It is not my area of expertise, and the Melbourne Uni team will do a better job of talking about this than I will. But it is interesting to understand the layers that are involved in getting an AI model to work, particularly in the natural language processing sphere. So in natural language processing, you don't start from a base of 0. There are a range of natural language processing models out there that already exist that have been trained on millions and millions of words. So that data layer at the bottom of the pile is what I'm talking about there. The models have been trained on books, on Wikipedia, to help understand the relationship between language, between words, meaning. And so what a team like the University of Melbourne team will do is they will look at the different base models that are available out there. And part of their job is to think which is a good one to start with. And they might run some tests across a range of different base models to think in this particular project, which model here is going to add the most value and be the best starting point for us. And then there's the model layer, which is looking over that data. This is where these choices are made. Which model that is processing through all this data is the best starting point for us? Then what we do, because those base models, we did some testing. In some areas, they performed okay on our data, but certainly not good enough to use. What we then do is add our data and our annotation and train that model up in this specialised area. And then you end up with a final model, which is the Justice Connect AI natural language processor, which has been developed in partnership with the University of Melbourne. A little bit on results so far of the project. So we have that model, we have that top layer now, and the model is working. It's effective across a wide range of areas of law. It's classifying with over 85% precision in some areas, which is really good. It averages 77.7 precision, but it is over 85% precise for 11 areas of law at this point. And so I thought you might be interested to see what those areas of law are. Where is it performing well? Where is it performing less well, and we need to do some more work? So tier 1, it's not very surprising that all the areas of law here are the areas of law where we get high volume. So the high precision really reflects the fact that we had so many data samples that we could help train the model with, because these are the areas of law that we regularly get inquiries about at Justice Connect. So there's a clear relationship between data volume and precision. Tier 2, again, these are areas of law that we get plenty of inquiries about. What these areas of law have in common, a lot of them, is either a very broad application or some niche applications. So litigation and dispute resolution is enormously broad. So it is inherently a tricky area for us to grapple with. How can we be sure that litigation and dispute resolution is or isn't present in a data sample? It's one of the areas we're really interested in. Tax law is also a really interesting one because it applies over such a wide range of activities, as does neighbourhood disputes. All kinds of words could bring that up. Guardianship and administration is an interesting one in that it is quite complex legally, and it's less likely to be self-identified by a help seeker. So this area of law is a bit more tricky. It's another one that we're really interested in. Having said all of that, we still have reasonable levels of precision in the model for those areas of law, mostly because we still have reasonable levels of data volumes. And the Melbourne University team, by the way, can tell me I'm wrong on any of that if I've not summarised it properly. I'm really keen to hear their reflections from having done the actual model training. The Tier 3, where we're getting lower levels of precision, often we have lower levels of data, but also public and administrative law is a good example of one that is quite complex, and people rarely use those words in the description of their problems. And Tier 4 largely is where we've had low levels of data, but interestingly, we have low levels of data for intellectual property, but we have high levels of precision because it's quite easy to train a model to spot an IP problem. So as you can see, there's tensions here around data volume and also around complexity and abstractness or abstraction in this training. So because our model now has sufficient precision in some areas, we wanted to start testing to see, is it going to help people? And we thought the best place to test the model was in our intake system at the point at which people need to choose their legal problem. And so what I'm going to do is pass over to my colleague, Will Jeffcott, who is going to provide you with a demo of how this actually works. Will is a developer in our team who's been working really closely on this project. But what I'll point out here on the screen is we have the question, briefly tell us about your legal problem. And we have the question, please select which of the categories that apply. And in our pilot, we're intervening here to try to help people in making that selection about which category applies based on analysing their answer to tell us about the legal problem. So I'll pass over to Will now, and he'll show you how it's actually working and some demos. And then I'll give you a little bit more information about the results of that integration.
Hello, everybody. All right, let's see if this will go. Beautiful. All right. Hopefully, I don't think it has come across. How can I change my tab? All right. So what we've got here is this is sort of how we've integrated the AI model into our online intake tool. And so we can see, and then we can get a bit of, which we're running as a pilot at the moment, and we can see how it works in a real life scenario. Currently, about 25% of our help seekers on the intake tool will get the AI pathway, so we can compare the data that we've got. This is sort of the first step of the AI aspect. I've sort of skipped over the original steps of the intake tool. And if we type in a legal problem into here, so if I have been evicted, the AI then can assess that problem. So we'll send that data to the AI model, which lives on another server. The AI will then send back a set of data, and then we've analysed that data to work within our intake tool. So if I assess that, it takes a little bit of time to load while the data is being sent across. And then in this particular case, it's sent back a result, and we've analysed that to match with our tenancy and eviction options. So the user would just get, the help seeker would just get one option, Previously, they'd get a list of between 20 to 25 options. So this is a lot less intimidating. And so then they can select this. They also have the option to add in the other categories if they think that they want to add more. If we sort of go back a step and say add a little bit more data, this, I stole something and have been evicted. And then we analyze that result. They'll now get 2 options. And the AI actually ranks the options. So it will send back the areas of law as well as a score associated with it. And then we use that to go, all right, it's more likely to be a tenancy and eviction issue in this case, and less likely to be criminal law. So there's a slight difference in the way we've presented these options to the users, to the help seekers, sorry. And yeah, so then if we go up behind the scenes, which I think is this tab up here, this is where we can sort of see, behind the scenes look at how the data works. So in this particular case, if this is the text that someone's entered, we will send that across to the AI, and the AI down here will send back this result. So this is what, once the AI API for the AI becomes something that is available for others to use, which is eventually where we want to get to. And I think that was a question in the chat I saw earlier. It's not there yet, but that's something we're working towards. This is what you would be interacting with. So you'd send this piece of text, you'd get a result going, yep, successfully got your result back. And then this is the data. This is where the area of law that the AI is identified with it. And this is the score. And the score is what we've used in that case to indicate the circles. And again, if I add a bit more data to this one, I stole something and was evicted. It will now return 2 results. So we've got the housing and residential tenancies, and we've also got criminal law. And then they're the 2 scores that in this case have been assigned to those pieces of data. As a couple of other examples here, we've got, if someone sends over a piece of text, my tree's burned down, the AI doesn't understand that. So it actually returns nothing. So we can then just go, all right, that's not a valid problem. It also does potentially return not a legal issue, but I don't have any examples of that. And then we can go, the AI specifically doesn't think your problem is a legal issue. In this case, some other examples here, we've got, unfortunately, my visa was denied, and then the AI has returned that as a migration problem. So there's a few different sort of samples there of that. And yeah, I think that probably sums up a bit of a demo. I'll hand it back to Kate. I'll get back to
Thank you so much, Will. I love seeing the demonstration working both in our own applications, but back at the model level as well. It's something that we are really interested in is how do we, I'm just going to get the presentation back up again. Okay. How do we integrate this AI? And this is very much a question that we're asking in our pilot in a way that makes it really clear that it is AI and that the answers that it is providing are not necessarily 100% correct, but it's an assistant to you in your own decision making. So that's one of our key areas of exploration at the moment. And we want to think about the different ways we can set up the interface to make that really clear. And so one of the ideas that we're playing with at the moment is the idea that as it's more accurate, or we think it's more likely to be accurate, the circle gets bigger. And for some more complex stories, they may actually return 6 different circles of different sizes to show how the model is assessing that it's more likely this is there, but it could also be these other things as well. And we've got some fascinating results from the integration so far, which is of those who used AI, 18% returned a partial entry, which means they didn't finish using the application, and 82% made it the whole way through. So this is our intake application. For those that did not use AI, 26% had partials and 74% had completed entries. So there's an 8% difference. If you used the AI, you were more likely to finish that application. Also, one of the problem areas in our intake application is where people are not sure which category to select in that legal problem list. They often make the selection something else, and then they write, I don't really know, can you tell me? Or I think it could be this, but I'm not really sure, which is completely fine, and it's how the system was developed, but there's more burden on us then to try and work out what the problem is. So for those that used AI, only 11% made a something else selection. And for those that did not use the AI, 25% made a something else selection. So we're beginning to see some really interesting insights from that pilot. The next issue to touch on just before I pass over to the University of Melbourne team is performance fairness, which is an issue that's incredibly important to us at Justice Connect. We know that AI can be biased. I explained those different layers in an AI model, and that base layer, which has done the huge amount of language training across a bunch of text samples from around the world, those text samples have bias in them. They have subject matter bias. They also have syntax bias. They are communicated in a certain way that might not align with the way people communicate in everyday life or people communicate in particular cultural contexts. And so the University of Melbourne team undertook an absolutely brilliant piece of analysis to look at how is our model performing across different cohorts. And it showed quite clearly that it is performing worse. So this is the accuracy rate. It is less accurate when an older person writes the language. It's less accurate when a First Nations person writes the language that it's analysing. So we have really clearly demonstrated that there is a performance bias in our model. We were expecting this to be the case, but it's really amazing to have actually shown this through really rigorous analysis undertaken by the University of Melbourne team. There's a whole paper on it. You can read that paper if you want to go a bit deeper into this. So what we're doing to address this is a dataset diversification project. So we are specifically looking to boost the number of language samples that we have in our training dataset across a wide range of cohorts where we know or we anticipate that the performance will be worse because their language diverges from that base language that the model's been trained on. Interestingly, for older people, there were some examples in the analysis where the way a sentence and story is structured is a bit more circuitous and a bit different to how a more structured chronological story of what happened is in the average piece of data in our data set. But the differences for each cohort are different. So it's really important that we get all those extra samples so that we can do that training and make sure that the model will perform well regardless of a person's language, style, background, cultural context. We've also recently received news that we have an ARC linkage grant, which is not something that I knew a lot about until we started this AI project, but it's a pretty big deal to get one. And the University of Melbourne team put a huge amount of work into this application process. I can't thank them enough. And we've successfully received very substantial funding to support the University of Melbourne's costs in working on the model. The model's co-owned by Justice Connect and the University of Melbourne. And so what this grant essentially does is means that Justice Connect no longer needs to cover the University of Melbourne's costs in this project. They are completely covered through this grant. What it does mean, though, is that Justice Connect has new and further costs that we need to cover for our side of the project, which I'll discuss at the end of this presentation. So I'm going to pass over to the University of Melbourne team, who I've mentioned a lot. I would love to hear from them. I've asked them to offer some reflections on the project, particularly what's it like working with a community legal organisation on a project like this? If others wanted to do a similar project, what would they need to be thinking about? So over to you.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Perfect. I've written like 2 slides. Should I share them, Kate, or what?
Absolutely. Yep. Go for it.
you might want to unshare it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Do you see my screen? Perfect. Hey, so I'm Jayhan, one of the member from the UniMelb team. We're going to talk a little bit about just 10 minutes talking about some of the reflections we have from the project. So the team consists of myself, Tim, and Mel. And to give credit where it's due, most of the work is done by Mel. Tim and I, we're just advisor to the in this collaboration. So really great thanks to Mel for doing pretty much all the work. So a couple of things that I'm going to talk about, I guess. So the first question that people ask is, how does this project compare to other NLP projects? And I'm going to talk in terms of comparing this project to academic NLP projects and also application NLP projects. By academic, I mean, just research projects, and application projects are projects that we work with other organizations, typically for-profit organizations. So comparing to academic projects, the quantity of data for this Justice Connect data set is obviously small because we tend to work with millions of instances, or at least hundreds of thousands of instances. But that said, comparing it to, say, application projects that we work with organizations, it's huge. Typically, we get no data sometimes because the organization isn't willing to share any data, or they couldn't be bothered to de-anonymize their data. So in that sense, we actually have training data, and even though it's small in an academic research project sense, I think it's good enough for us to do something. I don't think there's a minimum data set. I think more data is always better. I think we always would try to work with whatever we have, basically. So given the data that we have, I think it's already a luxury, and we can do something with it, which explains part of the success of this project. And the project is also unique in that it has a big focus on fairness, as you've already seen how Kate talked a lot about it. It's particularly important here because we typically work with disadvantaged people that, probably doesn't use, very standard typical language in their legal description. And it's very different to the models that we are usually trained on. Another thing is, of course, privacy. There are plenty of very sensitive information in the data that we have. Even after the anonymized, there's still plenty of, very sensitive information about people's lives and whatnots. And which is why this is a unique situation where, people come to us and ask us, oh, can you share the data with us? This is a situation where, we have a very strong reason why we can't share the data to, say, the public research community, because there's just too much sensitive information. There could be, some sort of collaboration to be done where we can share people to other people in private, but certainly the data will never be public, basically. And that's for good reason. Another thing that's unique is in the label of the legal, the area of law being annotated for these legal descriptions. In this case, Kate mentioned that there are multiple lawyers because we want different perspective annotating one particular legal description. And what that really results is that often you have a cluster of areas of law, and it's no longer really clear what is the ground truth, because it's not a single ground truth that you have. So this is a rather unique problem that we have to work with and understand how to assess or evaluate the model in a way where the ground truth is actually not just standard single ground truth. The second last point is, again, I mentioned this already, the help seekers legal description are typically not standard written language. And this is an important feature because the models that we use, typically they train on sort of standard written language. And so they're not, in a way, used to seeing this sort of language. And so it's always a big question, a research question, how well it's going to perform. And that's what gets us excited, actually, because we want to see, how well these models that have been used in the past for standard language, how they actually will work in real data like this. And lastly, of course, this is a very unique project, where we're actually doing AI for social good. And I have to confess, it's not something we often do. Most of the application projects we work with are for-profit companies where the ultimate goal ultimately comes down to profit making, right? Making things more efficient and making companies richer, which is very different from, of course, the ultimate goal here, which is about trying to help people. So it's for a good cause, and certainly something that we're very happy to be engaged and want to do more, if anything. So what are some of the key learnings working with Justice Connect's dataset? As I mentioned before, the ground truth is not straightforward because you have multiple ground truth from different lawyers. So that's something from a research perspective, something we have to deal with, something that we think about. How can we provide a good evaluation with multiple ground truths? I've also mentioned this already, that the models that we use, the BERT model that you might have just seen, it's pre-trained on standard language like Wikipedia or book corpus, which has a bunch of fictional stories and novels and whatnot. So it's kind of a sort of a question how well it's going to work on these legal descriptions. And we found that it's not too bad, which is why it's deployed now, right? There's of course some variation to the success, as you saw, depending on the area of law, but also generally speaking, the performance is also somewhat equitable for most of the demographics. Certainly there are exceptions, as you saw already, particularly for seniors and First Nations people, it's particularly bad. One explanation, of course, is about data, where Kate already mentioned, for example, in this case, the First Nations people we have the least data out of all demographics. So that might explain why they perform so poorly, but it doesn't explain all of it. For example, seniors have twice the amount of data, and for some reason they still perform really poorly. And also the really interesting thing is that seniors tend to be associated with elder law, which actually has pretty good performance for other people, but it's just that when seniors wrote it, it doesn't work really well, which we still don't really know what's going on. More analysis needs to be done. And the last thing is, in this Justice Connect dataset, we also have access to some demographics information for a small sample of users, which is great because that allows us to assess the fairness of the system, and that's nice. But we kind of understand this is a luxury, that in a lot of cases, in a lot of applications, you won't have this demographics information because it's sensitive or you don't collect them. And so this sort of translates the problem into an important thing that we need to understand, which is finding proxy attributes, that we look at other attributes that can potentially tell us demographics, basically. To give some examples, if we know about the postcode or the education level of a user, we might be able to use it to infer the income status, for example. Or if we know people are working elder law, most likely they're written by seniors, or if they're working in migration law, then they would have a diverse cultural or linguistic background, which means that the legal descriptions would probably have a very different style from, say, Australian English, for example. So these proxy attributes is something that we work with Justice Connect to try to understand how we can use them to identify certain demographics, and so allows us to measure fairness without needing direct access to that information. And lastly, what sort of advice would we give to other organizations who would like to get some sort of AI or NLP project up and running? I guess the first advice, and the most important advice, is data is everything for us. AI is not magic. You can't do anything without data, and any forms of data is good, even if it's not labeled. We've certainly worked with a lot of application projects with organizations where we have no data, where we have to use public data to try to mimic the domain of their application, and it's never going to work very well, and it's going to be very hard to know truly what the performance will be when they actually use it. So do your best to provide data, to create data, which would mean that maybe doing some sort of anonymization and whatnot, but it's an important step because I think a big part of the success depends on that. Another thing is having really clear outcome or expectation of the project. Sometimes organizations aren't very clear whether they're actually doing some sort of exploratory project, or actually they're thinking, at the end of the day, we want to take the outcome and implement it into our application pipeline. Have a very clear view, let us know what it is, because it would take the project into different directions if we know this is more an exploratory project or something that really we want more concrete outcomes that can be built into part of the system. And lastly, of course, we've mentioned this many times already. People are aware. People, at least I feel that there's a growing awareness about biases in AI systems, and it's not good enough that we build systems that we measure just using simple aggregate performance like accuracy, which is going to tell us a lot about how well it will work for the majority, but it will tell you very little about how well it would work for the minority. And nowadays, I think it's important that we try to build systems that are not just good in aggregate, but also fair as well, that works well for people across different backgrounds, basically. And I guess that sort of sums up some of our reflections working with Justice Connect. As I said, it's been a pleasure. We've super enjoyed this project, and yeah, looking forward to continue working together now that we have the linkage that Kate mentioned. And that's it from us.
Thank you so much, Jehan. That's a really fantastic summary. It's been an absolute pleasure for us as well working with the University of Melbourne team. It's a project where I have learnt a huge amount. They've been very generous in really explaining the hows and the whys behind what they're doing. So very quickly, what's next? We are in the process of evaluating how the AI is working in its integration into the intake tool. We're also continuing to train the model to improve it on accuracy and on fairness. And then the final step in the project is we hope to be able to make that API available to other charities and not-for-profits to use in their own settings. And there are so many use cases for a diagnostic natural language processor. We don't have time to go through them today, but we're always open to chat. What we would say is we would absolutely love to collaborate with you on this project. In particular, we are seeking further funding now that we have that linkage grant in place. We require funding to support Justice Connect's effort in the project, which I think we've shown what that entails through this presentation. So if any of you are interested in coming on board as a project funder for this next step of refinement and a focus on fairness, we would really like to speak to you. Another way you can collaborate with us is to share data with us to help us improve that performance and the fairness. We have a website and we will share the details of that, which has a bit more information on how you can share your data with us. And finally, down the line, we would love you to actually use the model and become part of a community of organisations working with this AI model, working to improve it together. So we have a short amount of time for questions, and I've seen some really interesting questions come through. So one of the questions is, do you know of any examples of where this is being done well in other social justice contexts? And my short answer is no, which does not mean they're not out there. It's just not something that we have been able to find. But I would love to hear about those examples. There is a similar project in the United States called the SPOT project, which we have drawn on hugely in how we've designed up this project. So that's worth taking a look at. Really interesting. It's not a model that we can apply in Australia because the data set and the training is so American. We tried it out with our data and it just doesn't work. So it kind of shows that you do need to do, in the context of natural language processing, some training in your context. Also had a question, could we ever replace needing a lawyer with AI? And I would say, who knows? At this point, absolutely not. What AI here is doing is helping to provide an answer, giving further support to a user, but we want people to also use their own logic and discretion in making assessments about which category applies. Something that Jehan has mentioned, though, which is so interesting to all of us, is the divergence of answers you get when different lawyers look at the same language, which I think points to a philosophical position in the law. Is there such thing as the truth? how is it that so many lawyers can reach different conclusions? And in that context, how can AI reach a conclusion when reasonable minds do differ? So it's a bit of a fundamental question around AI and the law, and something that I think we all need to keep thinking about. Just going to see if there's any other questions. We've got a question about discrimination. Yes, it is captured. We actually did a lot of thinking about how and where to capture discrimination. We didn't include it in the analysis because we've actually got the data split into 2 different categories because we've taken 2 separate approaches there. Another question is, can we include CLCs or legal aid in the training game? Absolutely. The reason we haven't done that to date is because we try not to ask CLCs and legal aid to do things that require more resources. We like to serve up things that can be helpful and reduce burdens rather than add them. But if there is a CLC or a legal aid out there that would like to participate in the game, we would love to hear from you. And I think that's all of the questions. So I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to our AI project. It's work I'm really proud of. And if you have any further questions or you'd like to collaborate with us, please do get in touch. And once again, a huge thank you to the University of Melbourne team who have put in so much work to this project so far and are really passionate about the whys, why are we doing this? And it's just a pleasure working with you. So thanks, everyone.